Let's talk to Paul Hocker. He's Play Development Manager at London Play, which is a charity that promotes wilder childhoods in concrete jungle. Well, that sounds interesting. Paul, tell us a bit more.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, we've been a charity in existence for about 15 years, and our work has been primarily to make London a great place for children to play in, to put it on a par with other great cities like Berlin and Rome, where children can play quite easily. And it's been a struggle, but we're getting there, and we're getting children playing out on the streets again, and we're putting in natural play equipment into some really concretey urban settings. We're doing all sorts of projects that make sure that childhood in London is a really worthwhile and happy experience. Because
we do have more green spaces than probably most other cities of this size, I would have thought. But it is sometimes the sort of well-known estates that where they were built, nobody seemed to give any consideration to the fact that children would be living there and would want somewhere to play.
Well, London is a tale of two cities, to coin that cliche, but it is, because if you're in Kensington, Chelsea, you have no shortage of parks. If you're in Islington or Lewisham or Southwark, it's a bit tougher. And those tend to be the more deprived areas anyway. And as the commercialisation of childhood sort of runs rampant, and the idea of being able to pay for free is in danger of being lost, if you can't pay to play, you're not going to be able to play. And that's part of our work, really, to make sure that there's an even playing field, if you like, in London. So the kids from deprived families can play as easily as those from the more wealthy families.
I suppose, thinking back to my childhood in a very rural area, there were no play facilities there. We sort of made our own play. Why is it more difficult to do that in an urban environment than a rural environment?
Well, it isn't actually. Sometimes rural environments are just as difficult for children to play freely in, because there's lots of farmers' fields that they can't go into. There's often no pavement on roads, so children can't actually walk safely down a country road on their own. And the assumption is because they're in a green space, they don't need a park. So you obviously are very lucky but not all children are so lucky in rural spaces. And in London, well, this is a city with nearly 2 million children, and they need to be able to play. And society has changed, I think, since I was a kid. I'm 45. So when I was growing up in the 70s, playing out and about was the norm. But now it's not the case, because there's fear of stranger danger and the real fear of dangerous traffic levels.
Well, I also think it's something deeper than that. I think it's that we've become so risk-averse as a society that we think there's a paedophile around every corner. We think that our child is going to be run over by the next approaching car. That health and safety regulations have just ruined a lot of kids' opportunities. And when I grew up on a farm, and it's probably sometimes 10, 15 of my friends in the village would come and play on the farm. Well, you'd never be able to do that. And I think what today's kids are missing out on, because they didn't have the opportunities, not just to play, but to learn about things that I and my friends had.
Well, play is a great engine for learning anyway. Learning at your own speed, rather than school where you're sort of shepherded along at a pace. And I think the issue with play is that it's not really appreciated as a key driver in children's development. It is in other countries, but not so much in this country. So that's part of our work, and our partners are playing and do similar work to really raise the profile of play and the importance of play in a child's development.
Can you think back to your childhood and what was the worst thing you did? Was there anything that might have been construed as antisocial behaviour today?
Oh, where do you want to begin? I mean, I was a bit of a tearaway when I was a kid, and the local coppers, knew me and my mates, but it wasn't them that kept us in line. The people that kept us in line were often strangers. People living up and down our street that were quite confident to come outside their house and say, "Oi, keep the noise down," or "Get off my flower beds," or whatever it was. They set the boundaries. It wasn't the police's job. It was the community's job, and they obviously weren't hindered by the fear of being accused of being a paedophile or whatever. That was just how it was, and it's like that in other countries. But for some reason, stories like the Madeleine McCann thing, that sort of tragedy, that has had an effect on strangers' relationships with other people's children. And even saying that sentence sounds a bit odd. But I mean being able to say, like, okay, when I get the train home, if I see a young person, for example, actually anybody with their feet in a seat, I always say, can you take your feet off the seat? And I feel confident enough to do that, but I'm not sure if a lot of people have that confidence now, and we need to restore that. We need to bring that back. It takes a society to raise a child. It takes a community to raise a child. Parents have the main responsibility, but we all have a responsibility.
Do you think
these people are going to inherit London? They're the ones that are going to be running London. We need to set them straight now.
Do you think that the general behaviour of young people nowadays is actually getting worse, or is it just that as we all get older, we have this sort of image of our childhood that maybe wasn't quite accurate? We only remember the good bits, and we think that the behaviour of the youth of today is rather worse than it was when we were young. I'm not so sure that's necessarily the case.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think we have like a kind of amnesia about our own childhood. We kind of edit out the bits where we were pushing the boundaries and just remember the halcyon days. And statistically, antisocial behaviour is on the decline. But here's the thing, Ian. On the weekend, I was watching a Quadrophenia, the Who film, and that was set in, well, it's London and Brighton, but there's a whole scene where teenagers were running rampage across Brighton, smashing each other over the heads with deck chairs. Now, that was young people back in the 50s and 60s, but we don't have that sort of thing now. Comparatively, I think young people are much better behaved. I was in my doctor's surgery the other day, and there were two old boys sitting next to each other, and this is absolutely what they said. They're having a chat, and they said, I've never had more young people open doors for me for years. And he was saying how more well-behaved he was experiencing young people. And that's been my experience too. Right now, I think young people are much more socially adept than they were perhaps.
Well, that's a very interesting view. I'm going to throw that out to our listeners in just a second. Paul, thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's Paul Hocker, Play Development Manager at London Play.